Thanks. I thought you were saying Bill Foote from somewhere, and it's an obscure little company out to the west of here somewhere. Hi, everyone, and I guess, okay, I've got a button there that I can push. So I'm here to talk about the runtime environment, often called the browser. I personally try to avoid saying that because it's a somewhat imprecise term. It's the interactive platform, sometimes called runtime. And the idea is that it's optional technology in a television or other ATSC 3.0 receiving device that can run some kind of broadcaster-supplied application. The application can be HTML5, which consists of tags and JavaScript, roughly. And it is based on HBBTV 2.0 and ATSC 2.0. Something that Madeline said earlier was that there are the kind of two modes. One of them is an application that is attached to primarily a TV channel. The idea is you tune to a TV channel, the television set, as quickly as it can, starts rendering audio and video, and then it loads an application that starts executing, influencing the behavior of the television set and the presentation sometime after audio-video has started being shown. There is also an option for an application service where you tune to a service and you first launch the application, and then it presents whatever it's going to present. So those are the kind of two basic modes that are most relevant to how this stuff is used in a TV set. And as was mentioned earlier, ATSC produces an emission specification. We're working together with CEA to marry that with device profiles to try to make an ecosystem whose complexity is manageable, so application authors can target things without having to deal with too much variability. Oh, is this multiple slides? It's not supposed to be. Oh, look at that. Okay. This is just a graphic that I stole. You've all seen, well, this kind of image has been shown many times before, including last year. The point here is that HBBTV, one of the sources of this, has been deployed largely in Europe, and some of the most popular services there have been catch-up TV and information services. Not really something that we need to spend, oh, I've got a version down there, a lot of time talking about. That's been talked about before. I assume that most folks have seen that. In ATSC 3.0, there is a proposed feature set that is essentially HBBTV plus. And the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 of the things on the list there are from HBBTV, and the rest are changes, enhancements, extensions, etc. The point here is I'm not going to go through each one of these and describe them in exhaustive detail. So I think that everyone's grateful for that. The point is that a software platform is, by its nature, flexible and can be added to, and the number of things one can add to a software platform is essentially infinite. And kind of as a result, there have been a large number of proposals of things that it might be interesting to add to ATSC 3.0. You know, it's a pretty big list. So one of the challenges has been, how do you deal with a pretty big list of things that have been proposed? One of the things that we're doing to deal with that is to focus on one of the most important use cases. So I just went out and went ahead and went out on a limb and picked one. I don't know if it's one that has been reflected in any of the stuff out there. Let's find out. Targeted advertising. Has anyone else been talking about that anywhere else? Not sure, but I don't know, maybe someone has. We'll see if I got lucky with that. For targeted advertising, there's, I'm going to talk about 3 fundamental needs of stuff you need to make that work. One of them is some way of the broadcaster sending an application with code, and that code is used to somehow or other select the advertisement to be shown. Now, this being an inherently connected platform and HTML5, part of the whole model of it when you're connected on a broadband network is that some of the logic can be done on the server, some can be done in the client, but not getting into all the nuances there. You need some kind of platform whereby the broadcaster can write code somewhere that makes a selection of which ad are you going to show the user. In addition to that, you need a way of doing a seamless media transition. So if you think about, you have a, there are many possibilities. You can do it many different ways, but if you focus on, you have a broadcast television program and you would like to insert an advertisement from either streaming broadband or NRT delivery, say, that seems to be, those two seem to be some of the more interesting or talked about anyway. You need a way to seamlessly transition from the one stream you're watching, the broadcast stream, to the inserted commercial. So you need some facility to make that happen. And then kind of the third pillar you need to make all this work is information about the viewer. One of the simplest pieces of information is geolocation. Where are they? And you can do a fair amount with that. There's also, roughly speaking, data they've entered and stuff they've done, behavior tracking. So out of that, if you take a look at the features that were listed before, it would be really nice if one of those lines had said targeted advertising, because then our job would be really simple. We just say, oh, well, let's concentrate it on the feature that is targeted advertising, and that list of 20 odd would have been reduced to 1. Unfortunately, that's not the way that, that interactive devices work. Those features were all APIs or other bits of lower level functionality than the business need. So if you do that, that's the list I came up with. This is not to be taken as completely dispositive or anything like that, but I picked out the ones that seemed to most bear on the need. And some of them are really clear, like if you are going to base your targeting on information that the user enters, and if they are going to enter that information into an application that the broadcaster provides, then you need a facility to do remote control input, for example. You need to be able to input stuff from the user to make that happen. So I won't go through the whole list, but the point is, of the 20-odd features that we were talking about, the list gets reduced down to 10 if this is what you're concentrating on. So that's just kind of comes with this kind of interactive platform. The next slide, I'll caution, should have an under construction in big red over it. For targeted ads, you need to have a way of being able to do these seamless media transitions. And this slide concentrates on two ways of doing it because it is ancient history that was written before lunchtime yesterday. This is an area that is being discussed at the moment, and so it's a work in progress. Broadly speaking, to do something like a seamless media transition, there's a few different solutions. At one end of the spectrum, you can have a low-level API and put a lot of the logic in the application that the broadcaster sends, authors and sends with the broadcast stream. At another end of the spectrum, you can have some kind of declarative format where that document is modified by code supplied by the broadcaster. And that's a kind of HTML-y way of doing it. And in the middle, you can have a higher level API of some sort. And This is an area that really needs to be fleshed out. Kind of what's happened in ATSC is that the lower layers of the system have been where decisions had to be made sooner. And as those decisions get made, the discussion percolates up to the higher levels. So that's kind of where we are in S34 on this right now. To drill down on these, just taking geolocation, I mean, it sounds really simple. You'd love to have something where, as a broadcaster, you ask the TV set, where is this TV set? And it tells you exactly with, I don't know, GPS coordinates or zip code or something like that. But the reality is messier. There are a couple ways you can do it. One of the ways you can do it is you can take the location that the user entered. That might be part of a setup screen when you buy the TV. It might be something that they have entered as some part of a broadcaster application. If you're connected, you can do it based on reverse IP lookup. So you can connect to some website, and the website can say, what is the IP address from which the connection occurred? And then it can look at a table and find out about where you are based on geographic tables that come from the ISP. You can do it perhaps based on a radio tower. That's certainly done in cellular networks. If you have something like an SFN for television service, one could imagine triangulating between a couple of towers and getting some idea where you are from that. You can find out from the companion device, so you can make a connection between your television set in the living room, for example, and a smartphone or a tablet, and you can ask the tablet, where are you? And it can use all of the mechanisms at its disposal to figure out and tell you. Or you can think about using GPS. That doesn't always work indoors, as you know, and it implies hardware. And some of these, but not all of them, are covered under a thing called the W3C geolocation API. It's a higher level API that will access many of these underlying functionalities. So the point that I'm trying to get across here is that even for something as simple as where are you in the world, it ends up being the case that there are multiple ways of doing it. Some of them make sense in some circumstances, and some of them make sense in other circumstances. If you look at a mobile phone, it has, roughly speaking, 3 ways that, well, 4, that it commonly does them. And you use them all, because some of them work sometimes, and some of them work other times. Drilling down a little bit more, there's personalization. How do you know, if you're doing, say, a targeted ad, which ad to show? One of the ways of doing it is from other entered data. So you ask the user to enter data about themselves. And the underlying runtime mechanisms that enable that, well, there are a couple. One of them is a thing called HTML cookies. It's a little database that sits on your client device, on your television set or your tablet. There's also talk about creating personalization data structures which might have an API to be able to access them on the device. And then, of course, to do enter data, you need some way of doing input. Or you can, again, connect to a companion device and get any idea of personalization data that it has. And then the other one for personalization is behavior tracking, which is something that has been, a lot of investment has been put into this in the web, I'll put it that way. I mean, there's a reason why Gmail is free, and that reason is that it allows behavior tracking that is used to more accurately target advertising. This is enabled in a runtime platform by, again, these HTML cookies. That's essentially what things like Gmail do. Well, yeah, actually, that is the underlying thing. We've also talked about service usage measurement in ATSC. That's another possible input or signal, as people say in sort of the big data world, that you can use to tell stuff about the person. And then when you start talking about behavior tracking, it's hard to say anything more specific than everything else in the platform. It's sort of a total information awareness thing. The more you can tell about what people do, where they are, what their habits are, the better you can target them. But then, oh, by the way, privacy. There is another counterforce operating here in that there is a certain level of sensitivity to how much you track people and with whom you share that data and under what circumstances that data is shared. So this is a fairly large area. ATSC is going to be defining some of the enabling technologies, but some of the other issues are things that are going to have to be sorted through as the actual working systems are rolled out and commercialized. So anyway, that's a brief tour of just some of the specific functionalities needed to enable this fairly important commercially relevant use case of doing targeted advertising. So some closing thoughts on this is some of the tensions around here have to do with the transition from what I guess you might call traditional media to broadband. In 1970, it was pretty simple. You broadcast a TV signal and people received it, and I guess they could call the station on the phone or pick at you, and so it was interactive in that sense. Today, it's very different. There's this hybrid between broadcast and broadband is inherently bidirectional, and it has all these profound ecosystem implications. And one of them is that even on a technical level, broadband is messy. If you look at how the web works, if you look at how Android and iOS works, there are many ways of doing things that sound like the same thing. Like GPS versus cell tower triangulation. They're both on my phone. They're both used, and there's a reason for that. So it's a little bit messy in that way. The other big takeaway is that features are not the same thing as technologies. Targeted advertising, I think I would call that a feature, for certain definitions of the word feature anyway. It is not a technical feature, but it is a feature of the platform if you're talking to someone about the business of television broadcasting. And they don't map one-to-one to the enabling technologies. We had 20 or so enabling technologies there, and about half of them are applicable to this particular business feature. As I've been saying, there often are more than one ways to solve the same problem. Some of them work in some circumstances, and some of them work in others. And that can be challenging to deal with because it's not always the right thing to pick one of the three possible ones. I mean, you don't on a mobile phone say, should you use cell phone triangulation or GPS? You provide them both on the platform. So that gives a flavor of some of the things that we're wrestling with in the Runtime group and some of the complications of making it happen. And with that, thank you. If there are any questions, you're welcome to contact Madeline at her home phone number. You can also question her about her very, very questionable taste in hockey teams. And with that, any questions?
Hi, Bill. Great presentation. Thank you. On the runtime environment, you didn't mention anything about constraints for security purposes. Can the apps, are they trapped in a sandbox, or is the security posture sort of, we know that the broadcasters are doing the apps, so it's inherently safe, they're not going to mess with their consumers, or is there a position on security here? Thank you.
That is a good question. It's one, HBB-TV certainly takes a stance on security. And the stance that it takes is that essentially broadcast is, well, cross-domain request forgery. The security, things are allowed to connect to the source from which they came. At a very simple level, that's what it says. And that's the sandbox that everything is put in to a first level of approximation. Some of the other features that have been discussed for ATSC 3.0 might have security implications that go beyond that, and that is something that will need to be sorted out. And that's about all I can say at that level. Charles?
Yes, thank you, Bill. Just a question. I think you mentioned about different ways to skin the cat, many ways to achieve the same purpose. I was just thinking, you mentioned that an interesting use case for the HTML layer or the presentation layers to do ad insertion. You gave some of the tools that's necessary. But I think also we should consider there are ways to do it. Maybe the ad insertion functionality that you talked about could be done even at the transport delivery level. That may not require the application presentation layer to be involved. So I think we've gone through presentations in the past that says, you could do it even at a transport level with the signaling and so forth. So I'm just saying we should take that into thought in terms of what are exactly our use requirements for ad insertion. I think we just want to balance the different options to do a certain task.
I think that's true. I think there is the essential line that needs to be drawn between somewhere there is code that the broadcaster writes that picks which ad gets inserted based on personalization information. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is the last question.
I think another key question, Bill, is where does the ad come from? And especially in the case of non-connected televisions, which I think is a use case, or infrequently connected, you can't rely on traditional, always connected streaming capability, right? So
Right.
The idea of an in-device cache and the tools to manage that cache, from a broadcast point of view are probably another thing. You want to comment on that?
Oh, yeah. In fact, NRT was, I kind of mumbled it, but yes, there are sources of the inserted ad can be broadband, can be an NRT delivered file, non-real-time file system. You could even think about switching between streams. So yeah, there are at least 3 ways to skin that particular cat, I guess. Okay, great. Well, thank you.